Welcome to today's class, Educational Test and Measurement, lesson number 4. The topic for the class, qualities of a good question. What then is the basic goal for the lesson? The basic intent of this class is to help you to appreciate the fact that specificity and unambiguity are two vital criteria that will enhance the quality of a good question. What are the objectives? Two basic objectives to be attained. We expect that by the end of this class, you should be able to 1. Describe the characteristics of a good question, and 2. Explain the concept of specificity of a test item. To begin with, let's go back a little to some few facts that we had learned in previous classes. Remember, in our lesson number 1, we mentioned that a test is a measurement tool. You still remember? Yes. Also remember that in our last lesson, that is lesson number 3, we introduced you to the basic fact that the main assumption in the usage of tools of measurement is that they are of good quality and that the information provided are dependable. This is a basic assumption. When you are using a measurement tool like a test, then you assume that your test is of good quality and any information that that test is providing is really dependable. Don't forget that in the same lesson number 3, we outlined some of the qualities that a good test must possess. We outlined how many? Can you still remember? 7 qualities. Can you outline those 7 qualities? Oh, yes, correct. Validity. We mentioned what validity is. We also talked about reliability. And of course, not forgetting usability. We said these 3 characteristics are what we regarded as fundamental qualities that every good test must possess. In addition, we outline 4 others. They include comprehensiveness, objectivity, discrimination, and not forgetting fairness. We still need to go back a little to remind ourselves of 1 or 2 basic facts. Don't forget that in that our lesson number 3, we concluded by helping you to appreciate the fact that setting good questions is not as easy as it seems to be, and that setting good questions requires basic knowledge, skills, and expertise. That, of course, is what these lessons are all about. In this particular lesson for today, lesson number 4, we shall expose you to the basic features expected of a good question. This, we believe, is one giant leap toward setting good question. So, what are the qualities that a good question must possess? A good question should possess the following qualities. 1. A good question should be objective-centered. How do we mean? Well, we know that a good teacher, classroom teacher, must be involved in the writing of the lesson plan, and one of such key things to do is the formulation of instructional, some also call it behavioral objectives, while planning the lesson. And what that implies is that a teacher must set his question to be centered on the objectives. A question must be centered on the behavioral objectives that the class teacher had developed during the planning stage of the lesson. A good question must also possess another vital quality. A good question must be context and purpose specific. What do we mean by this? Well, a question is not just to be harvested from anywhere, every question is expected to be framed in a particular context and setting. You know that each situation has different purpose to serve, and each question is expected to serve a specific purpose within the entire test. What that implies is that a question must be set for a particular purpose, for a particular context within the test. It must be serving a particular purpose. What that means is that the test must be framed in such a way that it coincides with the context and the purpose, and that must be considered. What is the function of this test item or this question within the entire test? And of course, it must relate with what was mentioned earlier, must be tied to the objectives. Not forgetting that a question must generate responses at acceptable level of performance. What do we mean by this? Well, what is the level of performance of those who are to take the test? So a good question should be based on the particular ability that it is meant to assess, so that the responses given by the student relate to their very ability. You should consider, yes, this particular question may be set in such a way as to assess a particular context, but you also have to look into the fact that the ability of the test takers should be taken into consideration. Let's take for an example. If one is testing the concept of density, look at these two questions. 1. Define the term density. 2. Explain what is accountable for why ice floats on water but stone sinks in water. Basically, these two questions are set to assess the same concept of density. But of course, the first is at a lower level of performance for the respondent, while the second is at a higher level of performance. So a good question must be set to consider the level of performance of the test taker. Another quality which I see to be very, very important. A good question must be phrased in such a way that the task is 1. Clearly, and 2. Unambiguously defined. We repeat, a good question must be phrased in such a way that the task is clearly and unambiguously defined. Let's see what we mean. When you are phrasing a good question, the wordings must be carefully selected so as to aim the student to the approach you want them to take. Don't just assume this question, they should know what the response is. The question should be phrased in such a way that the task expected is clearly defined, and is clearly defined in such a way that it does not yield more than one particular answer. So, why making the choice of words for questions? Words like discuss and explain sometimes can be ambiguous. If you use discuss, then give specific instructions as to what points should be discussed. Let's take some examples to illustrate this very important aspect of making your question to be clearly defined and unambiguous. An English homework. The question, write an essay on dog. Everybody assumes this is a very simple question. The task seems to be clear. But let's take a look at this. We once considered it before. And look at this. The question, is it wrong? The question the student is responding to is to write an essay on dog. But take a look. Teacher asked me to write essay on dog. Yes, look at the poor boy. He actually wrote essay on dog. But the question is, has this boy actually addressed the task expected of the question? To some extent, we will say yes, but by the teacher's demand, we will also likely say no. So that question seems to be ambiguous, subject to multiple interpretations. Let's also take a look at this question. English spelling exercise. How do you spell spelling? How do you spell physical, rather? Well, this is taken from Mark Angel comedy. It might look like a comedy, like a joke, but the fact remains that questions should be phrased in such a way as to enable the demand to be clearly spelled out and not to be ambiguous. So, watch the clip.
How do you spell physical?
As success, you wrote F-I-S-I-C-A-L.
Success. The correct spelling of physical is P-H-Y-S-I-C-A-L. That is physical.
Auntie, that is your own spelling for physical.
Ha.
My own and your own are not the same.
Ha.
You ask me how do I spell physical, Abby?
So, we ask, is anti-success wrong? The teacher asked, how do you spell physical? Can you guess what the problem with the phrasing of the question is? Let's move on. Let's take a look at some items. At a glance, you might not easily discern whether the questions are properly phrased, but take note of those two qualities we said. Every question must be phrased in such a way that the task is clearly defined and unambiguous. So number one, who is the president of Nigeria? Can you discern any problem with that? All right, we move on. Question number two. Where does the vice president of Nigeria come from? Another question. What do we do before we eat? That's taken from home economics. What do we use to measure our body temperature? That's taken from basic science. Should the present governor of Gombe State spend more of taxpayers' money on the establishment of more higher educational institutions? That is taken from a course in political science. Write a short note on characteristics of living things, also taken from basic science. Another question. In not less than a page, discuss the parts of speech, taken from English language. Another question. The president of Nigeria was born in the state of Dash, taken from social studies. When you take a look at this question, you may not see any problem with each of these test items, but let's consider sample answers to the questions. After considering the sample answers, then you should be able to go back and decide what could really be responsible for the answers. Let's go to the first question. Who is the president of Nigeria? Can you discern any problem with this? But take a look at the sample answer. The president of Nigeria is an old man, a husband of one wife, and an ex-military head of state. Is the student wrong? What do you think could be responsible for this answer? Well, the teacher is likely to say, but the student did not tell me the name of the president. But we ask, is the question demanding for the name of the president or demanding for who the president is? And the student properly addressed the task of the question. So we ask, what could have been the problem? I leave you to provide the answer. Take a look at another one. Where does the vice president of Nigeria come from? Oh, you might be quick to rush Ogun State. Maybe you are right, but look at the question and compare with the sample answer from a student or sample answers from some student. The vice president of Nigeria comes from, a student said God, another one said Ijebu, then another one said his parents. Any of these three students wrong? Yes, the president of Nigeria comes from God, and of course, comes from his parents. They actually have addressed the demand of the question, but the problem, as you will see, is that the question is a bit ambiguous, subject to multiple interpretations. Let's take a look at yet another one. What do we do before we eat? This question we said is from home economics, but what if it is from Christian religious studies? What are the possible answers? A student said, we wash our hands. Another said, we pray. Yet, we cook the food is the response from another student. We sit down. Is any of these answers wrong? What could be responsible? I think by now you should be able to start telling us what do you think is responsible for each of these answers. Yet for the basic science, what do we use to measure our body temperature? You expect thermometer as the answer? Oh, maybe you didn't look at the question correctly as the students have done. We use the back of our hands to measure our body temperature. Is the student wrong? Is the answer provided wrong? Has the answer addressed the demand of the question? So take a look at the question properly. What do you think could be responsible? Not all. Let's take a look at this. Should the present governor of Gombe State spend more of taxpayers' money on the establishment of more higher educational institutions? And the student just said yes. Another one said no. And the teacher will say, but I expect them to explain, to provide reasons. But take a look at the question. The demand of the question indicates the need for explanations. What do you think could have been responsible? I leave you also to provide the answer. The president of Nigeria was born in the state of Dash. You are expecting Katsina State? Maybe that may not be what the question is demanding. But take a look at the answers. Nudity, infancy, and another one said bliss. Any of the answers wrong? What could have been responsible? Yes, these are really important issues to take a look at. Let's still go further. Simple math question. The question, if it takes 8 men 4 days to build a wall, how long will it take 4 men to build the same wall? Hold on. You don't need calculator for this. Very simple, because a student quickly saw into the question. No time, because the wall had already been built. So the 4 men have no wall to build, because the 8 men had already done the work in 4 days. So why will the 4 men that are to build the same wall, what business do they have again? So take note. What do you think could have been responsible for that? Let's take a look at yet another example. This time around, we are going back to another of Mark Angel comedy. Please take a look at this clip and tell us what could be wrong.
If Emeka has 50 cubes of sugar and Emeka leaks 40 cubes of sugar, what will Emeka have?
Uncle I.
Cynthia.
Uncle, if Emeka leaks 40 cubes of sugar, Emeka will have diabetes.
So we ask, is Cynthia wrong? The answer is very obvious. So what do you think could have been the problem with the question? This question must be unambiguous and must address the task of the question. What have we learned in the lesson, this particular lesson? We have learned that a good question should be objective-centered, and a good question must be context and purpose-specific. A good question must be phrased in such a way that the task is clearly and unambiguously defined. We really expatiated on this. And a good question must generate responses at acceptable level of performance. In our next lesson, we will go a bit further by taking a look at classification of tests based on item format.